2:46. The floor is cold through the knees of my trousers. In 10 minutes, the bell will ring. I have said the names this morning. I have said my own. I am going to tell you how I came to be kneeling. My name is Corwin Ashe, and on the 14th night I said the word offered instead of the word offering, and that is the sentence I will begin with, because that is where my life ended and this other quieter thing began. But before that, the porch lights. I was standing at the kitchen window of a cabin I had owned for less than 9 hours at 2:47 in the morning, holding a cup of tea gone cold in my hand, and every porch light in the town below me came on at once. Not in a wave, not one after another, all of them in a single soft coordinated bloom of yellow, the way you might imagine a hand throwing a master switch on the world. I felt it in my chest before I understood what I was seeing. A retired firefighter learns to notice a coordinated act. 8 men moving as one body toward a truck. 12 porches lighting for the same reason at the same second. The mind reaches for the cause before the eyes finish the sentence. That was my first minute in Verren's rest. I want you to have it before I give you anything else, because the story that follows tries very patiently to explain itself away, and I do not want you to be seduced by the explanations. The town below me was not a town. It was a ledger, and I am telling you this from inside its margin. If slow burn dread is a place you are willing to sit in for a while, stay with me here on the porch. Keep the light on with me. This story has no other pace it can be told in. The realtor's name was Patrice, and she drove me up from Charleston in a white sedan that smelled of pine air freshener and old coffee. She told me the town was small, the winters long, the people the kind who left you alone unless you needed something. She said it in a tone that suggested she believed it, and I liked her for that. She was in her 40s, tired around the eyes in the way people are tired when they drive for a living, and she had a habit of tapping the steering wheel with her thumb on the downbeats of sentences she had said too many times. Somewhere on the second-to-last switchback, she glanced up at the rearview mirror at nothing in particular and said without explaining, "You're the second one this month." Then her thumb tapped and she went on about the winters. I had come to Verren's rest because my apartment in Charleston had become a place I could not sleep in. I had spent 31 years as a firefighter, and for the last 11 of those years, I had spent most nights walking my apartment because a woman on the 4th floor of a house on Loudon Street had asked me on the stairwell whether her son was going to be all right, and I had told her he would be, and he had not been. He was 9. He was the age my older brother had been the year our own house burned in Beckley in 1963, and I had thought, standing on the stairwell on Loudon Street with the smoke in my mouth, that this was the sentence my whole life had been shaped to prevent me from saying. I had said it anyway. Then I had gone home. Then I had waited 11 years to leave. Then I had come here. I signed the papers on the porch of the cabin. Patrice shook my hand. She told me the previous owner had been a widower named Aldous. She stumbled on the name, took a small breath, corrected herself. Aldous Byrne. And that he was very peaceful now. Present tense. I noticed. I noticed the way a firefighter notices the color of smoke. I did not say anything. She smiled at me and told me a lot of people who come up here find the quiet difficult at first, and then do not want to leave. Then she drove down the switchback, and I stood on the porch, and I listened to her engine fade until the wind was the only thing left, and I went inside. The kitchen was small and clean. The counters had been wiped. The stove was cold, but not dusty. In the second drawer down, by the sink, I found what I now understand was left for me. 2 things. A laminated card, yellowed at the edges, printed on both sides in a plain serif type, and tucked underneath the card, a small square of unlined paper folded once. I unfolded it. It was a note written in a slow, careful hand. Corwin, the words are on the card. Do not substitute. I am sorry. The one under the square is patient, but the one behind the one under the square is not. A B. It was dated the 12th of March. I had signed the papers on the 21st. I had first contacted Patrice about the listing on the 17th. Aldous Byrne had written my name on a square of paper in his own kitchen 9 days before I had heard the cabin existed, and he had written a second sentence I could not parse and would not think about for many weeks, a sentence I now believe was the only warning I was ever going to be given about what the town was actually built over. I read the note 3 times. I set it on the counter. I picked up the card. The front of the card carried a prayer. 11 lines. The words did not name a god I recognized. They named a thing they called the Keeper. They thanked the Keeper for the night that had passed, and they asked the Keeper to count the town among the counted, and near the end they carried a line I will give you, because it is the line I now cannot stop hearing. Let the count carry us into the morning. That line, spoken by a town in unison at 3 in the morning, in a low tide of voices coming up out of a bowl of land, I will not be able to describe to you what that sounds like until I have described everything else first. Hold the line. It is the phrase the town said. It is the phrase I said. It is the phrase, in the end, I will still be saying. On the back of the card, in the same type, were 4 sentences. Speak every word. Speak them together with the town. Do not substitute. If you miss a word, the bell will ring for you. I stood at the counter with the card in one hand and Aldous's note in the other, and I thought about a man who had written my name into that note before I had chosen it for myself. Then I put the card in my shirt pocket, and I went out to the porch, and I sat there until the light began to change behind the eastern ridge, and I made a decision that felt at the time like reasonableness. I would kneel by the kitchen window at 2:49 the following night, and I would speak the words along with the town. That is what a rational man does when he is given clear instructions in a place he does not yet understand. The second night, I did exactly that. At 2:47, the porch lights bloomed below me, and I was already on my knees. At 2:50, I had the card open on the sill. At exactly 3, the bell struck. I do not know how to describe the sound. I have heard bells before, church bells in Charleston. The small brass bell my grandmother kept on her mantel, the electronic tones that stood in for bells at the firehouse. This was none of those. It was low and it was heavy, and it did not travel through the air the way sound travels. I felt the first strike in my sternum before I heard it in my ears. 3 notes, each one wider and deeper than a bell had any right to be. The glass of the kitchen window did not vibrate. I noticed that. I noticed it because I have stood next to church bells while they rang, and glass vibrates near a bell, and this glass did not. And yet the strike was so full inside my chest that my teeth ached with it. On the 3rd strike, the whole town below me began to speak. They spoke together, one voice made of many. I read from the card and I matched their cadence as best I could, and I stumbled once on the 4th line and caught up on the 5th. My voice was small in my own kitchen. Theirs came up from below in a single low tide. When the prayer ended, the porch lights, one by one in a slow, soft cascade, went out. I stayed by the window a long time. Then I went to the tape recorder I had set on the sill, and I played it back. I had brought the recorder with me from Charleston out of habit, from the years when I recorded my own voice at night after bad calls, walking through what I could have done differently. It still worked. The town's voices came through clearly. My own came through clearly. And underneath both, so faint that I had to lean in with my ear almost against the little speaker, was a 4th sound. Not a voice, not exactly. A slow, patient exhalation that lasted the entire length of the prayer and did not draw breath between phrases. It ended precisely on the word remain. I turned the recorder off. I did not play the tape again. I have not played it since. The next morning I went down into the town. The general store was on the square, 3 doors down from the base of the bell tower. Its windows faced the tower. Its front counter faced the tower. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, gray braided, and she smiled at me when I came in and asked if I was the one who had taken Aldous's cabin. I said I was. I told her my name, Corwin. I said Corwin Ashe, and she said hers was June. She rang up my groceries without hurry. When she handed me my change, she closed my fingers around it briefly, the way you do with a child, and she said without looking up that I would want to be inside by 2:45, and I would want to know the words by tomorrow. I said I had found the card. She nodded once. She did not smile. She said, "Then you know." I went out into the square. I did not stand under the tower. I looked up at it from across the way. The stones were older than the town, older, I thought, than any town this side of the ridge. They were not the local stone. I have lived in the mountains long enough to know what the local stone looks like, and this was not it. It was darker, and it was finer grained, and I noticed as I stood there that the tower's shadow did not fall the way the shadows of the buildings around it fell. The sun was high and slightly west. The shadows of the storefront stretched east. The shadow of the tower stretched north. Northeast, at a slow angle, as though the light that cast it was not the light that cast the rest of the square. The tower had no door I could see. It had no windows. It had, near the top, an open belfry, and inside the belfry the bell was hanging in a way that did not seem to require its yoke. It was, if I looked at it too long, not exactly hanging. It was held, as though the yoke were a formality and the bell had agreed, for the time being, to be there. A man passing behind me said, "You don't want to stand there too long." I turned. He was thin, 60 perhaps, in a canvas coat despite the mildness of the afternoon. He had the face of a man who had said the same thing to a lot of newcomers over a lot of years. "Why not?" I said. "It knows what you look like from above," he said. "Better if it learns your face slow. From the porch. From the window. Not from underneath." He did not smile. He nodded to me the way one man nods to another when the conversation is finished, and he walked on across the square and turned up a side street and was gone. I did not stand under the tower after that. For the next 2 weeks I lived in the cabin. That is the honest way to put it. I split wood I did not need. I made chili. I ate for 4 days. I walked down to the store every second morning and bought bread and eggs and coffee, and I nodded to June, and I learned the name of the man in the canvas coat, Elias, and I nodded to a woman named Ruth who kept a small library in the back room of the post office, and I nodded to a boy of about 11 named Samuel who was always sitting on the low wall by the tower whittling something with a pocket knife. The town accepted me the way a still pond accepts a stone, a moment of disturbance, a settling, and then the surface returning to what it had been. Every night at exactly 3 the bell rang. Every night at 2:47 the porch lights bloomed. Every night I knelt by my kitchen window with the card in my hand and spoke the prayer along with the town, and my voice grew smaller and more precise, and by the 9th night I did not need the card. On the 5th night I had a small experience I have to describe honestly, because if I do not, the rest of this will not make sense. I was kneeling by the window. The prayer had begun, and somewhere around the middle of it, on the line that begins, "Let the Count carry us," I felt something I had not felt in 11 years. I felt useful, not in the shallow sense, in the deep sense, in the sense that I was part of a body larger than myself, and the body knew what it was doing, and it needed me in the exact place I was standing. I have chased that feeling my whole life. I had it every morning at the firehouse for 31 years, and I lost it the day I turned in my badge, and I had come to the cabin because I had accepted that I would never have it again. And here it was, at 3 in the morning, in a kitchen on a ridge in West Virginia, given back to me by a town that spoke as one, and a bell that spoke through the walls of my chest. I stayed at the window after the porch lights went out. I did not move. I was not afraid. I was, if I am honest, grateful. That is the part I have to be honest about because everything that happened afterward depends on it. I was grateful. The Count had folded me in. I had somewhere to be at 3 in the morning. I had a purpose that arrived on schedule and did not require me to save anyone. The next day, I noticed that I was moving my lips through the prayer while I washed the dishes. My mouth did it on its own, the way a hand keeps checking a pocket for keys after the keys are already found. It did not trouble me. It felt like company. On the 11th night, something happened that I did not have the language to be troubled by until later. It was around 10 in the evening, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a book I'd stopped reading. The cabin was very still. The stove was making the small settling sounds a stove makes when it is burned down to embers. I had, without particularly meaning to, said out loud into the room, "Let the Count carry us into the morning." I said it the way a man says a phrase he has grown fond of, the way you might say a line of a song you have been humming to test how it sounds. There was no ritual in it. There was no bell. It was 10 in the evening and I was alone. I set the book down. I reached for my tea. From the corner of the front room behind the wood stove in the space where a small armchair sat with its back to me, a voice said, "Let the Count carry us into the morning." It said it a beat late, not late enough to be an echo. The room was not shaped for echoes, late enough to be an answer. I stood up so fast the tea slopped over the rim of the cup and onto my hand, and I did not feel it. I went to the front room. The armchair was empty. The corner behind the stove was empty. The window was closed. There was no cabinet, no door, no source. I stood there for perhaps 2 minutes with my scalded hand in a fist at my side, listening. Nothing spoke again. I told myself eventually that I had said the line twice without noticing, that I had said it and then said it again, half a breath later, and my ear had put a small distance between the two sayings that had not really been there. I told myself this for the rest of the evening. I told myself this at the window at 2:47 when the porch lights bloomed. I told myself this while I knelt, but I did not say the line aloud again outside the prayer. And when I said it inside the prayer on the 6th line where it belonged, I said it a shade quieter than I had said it before, because I had learned in the 11th night's small way that my kitchen had begun to listen. On the 14th night, I missed a word. I did not miss it out of carelessness. Elias came up the switchback at 2:30, which had never happened before, and knocked on my door. It was the first time anyone from the town had climbed the switchback to see me. I opened the door. He stood on the porch and he looked at me, and he did not step inside. He said, "You said the 4th line short last night." I said I had not. He said, "You did, only by a breath. But the Count doesn't grade on effort. I came up to tell you because Aldous told me the same thing once, and it helped him. Center yourself early tonight. Be on your knees by 2:48. Breathe before the first strike." Then he turned and went back down the switchback into the dark, and I stood on the porch with the door open, watching him go. And by the time I closed the door, it was 2:37. I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I do not know why I put the kettle on. A firefighter's hands do things at moments of pressure, and mine reached for the kettle, and then the card was in my shirt pocket where it always was. And then the card was not in my shirt pocket because I had leaned forward too fast to check the clock, and it had slipped, and I bent to pick it up, and when I stood back up, the porch lights below were already blooming. And it was 2:46, not 2:47, and I had lost a minute somewhere between the kettle and the card, and my breathing was wrong. I knelt. I tried to center. I could hear my own heart in the base of my throat, which is not where a firefighter's heart should ever be. The porch lights had bloomed early, or my clock had been wrong, or the town had begun to breathe in before I had begun to breathe in. I could not tell. I could not tell which of us was off. I could feel the prayer waiting in my mouth like a bird that did not know whether to sing or bite. At 2:59, the kettle began to whistle behind me. I had forgotten it. It rose from a low murmur to a full scream in the space of 4 seconds, and I did not stand up to move it, because I was already inside the last breath before the first strike, and standing would have cost me the prayer. The bell rang. I felt the first strike in my sternum a fraction of a second before the town began to speak, and I began the prayer, and I was catching up from the first line. I was 1 syllable behind on the second. On the 4th line, the town said the word offering, and I, breathless, catching, said the word offered. It was a syllable. It was a tense. I heard myself do it. I did not correct it. You cannot correct a prayer in the middle. You continue. You finish. The kettle screamed behind me for the remainder of the prayer. When the prayer ended and the porch lights went out, I stood up and turned off the burner and lifted the kettle from the flame with a hand that would not stop shaking. I set it on the cold ring. Then I noticed the cup. It had been on the counter beside the stove. My cup. The cup I had drunk tea from every morning for 2 weeks. There was a hairline crack running from the rim to the base. I had not touched the cup. It had been sitting still. The crack had not been there when I had put the kettle on. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. I do not know how long I sat there. When I got up, the dawn was already gray behind the eastern ridge. The next day, I did not go down into the town. Around noon, I picked up the phone in the front room. An old landline the previous owner had kept paid, one of the small conveniences that had come with the sale, and I called Charleston. I called Denny Halbrook, who had been my captain for the last 9 years I worked and who had signed my retirement papers. He answered on the third ring. I said, "Denny, it's Corwin." There was a pause. He said, "I think you have the wrong number." I said his name again. I said mine. I said the name of the firehouse and the name of the street it stood on, and the year we had both come up through the ranks. He said in the patient voice a man uses with a stranger who has become a small worry, "Friend, I don't know you. I'm sorry, you've got the wrong number." Then he hung up. I stood holding the receiver. I meant to set it back in the cradle. My hand did not move, and in the second between when he hung up and when a dial tone should have started, there was no dial tone. There was silence. Then the dial tone came on, a full second late, and it sounded not quite like the dial tone I had been listening to for 60 years. It was pitched a little lower. It hummed a little longer than it should have before it broke. I set the receiver down. I did not call again. The day after, I went. June rang up my groceries. When she handed me my change, she did not close my fingers around it. She did not quite look at me. She said in a voice pitched slightly lower than her usual voice, "You were off last night." "One word," I said. She nodded. She did not answer. She turned to sort receipts. I walked out and across the square. Elias was standing by the low wall where Samuel usually sat, looking up at the belfry. He heard me come up behind him and did not turn. "I heard," he said. "How does everyone hear?" It was one word. "There's no everyone. There's the Count. The Count knows." I stood next to him. The bell hung in the belfry, held rather than suspended. "Tonight it will ring for you," he said. "At 3, only you will hear it, and it will say your name." I did not answer. "Don't go out to the square, whatever you hear, whatever it says. Don't come down. If you stay in the cabin, sometimes it lets it pass. Sometimes. That's the most I can tell you. Sometimes. Sometimes. Aldous made it 14 years past his first miss. He was careful. He was quiet. He said the prayer twice on the nights he wasn't sure. How did Aldous die? Elias looked at me for a long, patient moment. "Aldous didn't die," he said. "Aldous stopped being counted. Nobody in this town remembers him but me, and I only remember because I was standing here on the morning he stopped, and I made myself say his name out loud every day since, so the Count wouldn't take that too. Aldous. Aldous Byrne. He raised chickens. He liked lemon in his coffee. He gave me a coat one winter when mine wore through. Aldous Byrne." He said the name 3 times, the way you say a phone number you are trying to hold in your head until you can find a pen. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said one word more, a word that was not any of the words on the card, and not any word I had ever heard him say before, and not any word I have heard him say since. I will not write it here. It was 2 syllables. It began with a soft consonant. He said it once, and closed his mouth after it, as though he had said it to seal it back inside himself. He turned and walked away across the square, and I was alone. I went back to the cabin. I did not go down again that day. At 2:47 that night, the porch lights in the town below did not bloom. I stood at the kitchen window with the card in my hand, and I watched the town stay dark. And I understood that the town was not praying that night. There was no need. Tonight the bell was not speaking to them. At 2:58, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. It felt safer to be low. At 3, the bell rang. I felt the first strike in my sternum, and in the instant between the first strike and the second, I understood that Elias had been right about the sound. The town could not hear this. It was speaking to me, and on the second strike it said my name. I will not write it here. It said it clearly. Not in a voice. The bell has no voice, but in the specific frequency of the metal, so that hearing the strike was hearing the name, so that the two could not be separated. My name in bronze. My name held rather than suspended. My name in the throat of something that had been waiting under the square for longer than any of the stones had been cut. In the same instant, on the shelf above the kitchen table, the small framed photograph I had brought from Charleston, my brother aged 9, taken in the summer of 1962. The one photograph I had chosen to bring into the new house turned face down on the shelf. It did not fall. It did not slide. It turned as though a hand I could not see had laid it flat, and the small brass stand behind it folded neatly closed under it. I did not stand up. I did not go to it. I did not touch it for 3 days. On the third strike, I understood the prayer. I understood it the way you understand a language you have been speaking without knowing you were speaking it. The words on the card had said what they said, but the meaning underneath the words had said something else. We remain did not mean we continue to exist. It meant we are still owed. Every night the town knelt and confirmed the debt. Every night the keeper counted the debtors and accepted the payment of another night's acknowledgement. The prayer was not worship. It was not protection. It was a ledger. The town was a ledger, and the keeper, held in bronze in a belfry with no door, was the accountant, and the accountant did not forget, and the accountant would not forget me because I had put my mouth in the ledger, and then I had put the wrong word in the ledger, and the ledger did not accept substitution. Above me, from a beam I had not paid attention to since I moved in, a small, fine dust began to fall in a slow, steady thread onto the kitchen floor. There was no dust anywhere else in the cabin, only from that beam. Only during the third strike, it stopped when the sound faded. I sat on the floor. I did not move. I waited for a fourth strike that did not come. I waited to feel my body change. Nothing happened. I sat until the dawn came up gray behind the eastern ridge, and then I stood because my legs were cramping, and I made coffee because that was what a man does in the morning, and I noticed that my hands were steady. Around 8, I walked down into the town. The square was ordinary. June was opening the store. Ruth was sweeping the step of the post office. Samuel was on the low wall with his pocket knife. Elias was crossing the square with a canvas bag over his shoulder. I raised my hand to Elias. He looked directly at me, and his gaze moved through me and past me, as though there were a tree behind me he had been meaning to look at. He kept walking. He turned up a side street and was gone. I told myself the sun was in his eyes. I walked to the store. The bell over the door was a small brass bell that had rung a small, ordinary ring every morning. I had come in for 2 weeks. It did not ring the same ring for me now. It rang half a tone lower, and it rang shorter, as though the clapper had struck softer wool. June looked up from her ledger. She said, in the polite voice she used for tourists who had come up from Charleston for the day, "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" I stood in her store. I looked at her. She looked at me. There was no recognition in her face. There was not even the memory of recognition. "Bread," I said. "Aisle by the window." I did not go to the aisle. I walked, without meaning to, behind the counter and around to the far side of it where her ledger was open. She stiffened, but did not stop me, a stranger's small rudeness, not yet worth objecting to. Her ledger had a column of names down its left side, each name paired with a small mark for the day's purchase. I saw June's careful handwriting. I saw Elias. I saw Ruth. I saw Samuel's parents. And near the top of a page 1 week old, I saw a line that had been carefully, thoroughly scratched out with the same pen. One long, straight scratch, then a second at right angles, so that the letters underneath were unreadable, but the shape of the space they had occupied was still there. I could not read the name. I already knew whose name it was. I went out of the store without the bread. At the post office, I checked my box. There was one envelope. It was addressed to me. My street was correct. My town was correct. My name was spelled Corwin Ashe. I stared at it for a long time. Corwin with a Y. The mistake was not one a person makes. It was a slippage in the spelling itself, as though the letters of my name were losing their grip on their positions. I opened the envelope. The letter inside an insurance notice from Charleston, a piece of the ordinary paperwork that follows a man from an old life into a new one, had my name spelled correctly on the letter and incorrectly on the envelope, as though the mistake had happened after the letter was written, as though the mistake was happening on its way to me. I walked up the switchback. I closed the cabin door behind me. I stood in the front room a long time with my back against the door. Then I went to the kitchen. I picked up the laminated card from the counter where I had left it. I turned it over. The 4 sentences were there. Underneath them, in the same plain serif type, was a 5th sentence I had not seen before. If you have missed a word, you will not be missed. I read it 3 times. I set the card down. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not weep. I had not wept in 11 years, and I did not know how to start. The coffee in the cup at my elbow had gone cold. I had poured it before I picked up the card. I had read the 5th sentence 3 times, and the coffee had gone from steaming to room temperature in that reading, which is not possible in the ordinary movement of time, and I understood that some hours in this cabin were going to be longer than the hands of the kitchen clock would show. The kitchen clock, when I looked up at it, had stopped at 3. It had been running that morning. It did not run again after that day. I understood sitting at the table that nothing was coming for me. There would be no knock. My name had been removed from the count, and with it, everything the count had held. The bell had not marked me for death. It had marked me for absence. My mail would misspell me until it stopped. The store's bell would ring a stranger's note for me until it did not ring for me at all. Elias's eyes would move past me, and one morning Elias would forget that they had ever meant to see me. A man in my situation can leave, or he can stay. To leave is to arrive somewhere else already erased. I chose to stay. I could not, in the end, be the kind of man who was not on his knees at 3. The next morning I went down again because I did not yet believe what had happened. I told myself the store had been a bad moment. I told myself June had been tired, that Elias had been distracted. I walked into the store, and the small brass bell above the door rang half a tone lower, and June looked up from her ledger, and she said in the polite voice she used for tourists, "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" The same sentence in the same intonation, as though the previous morning had been rehearsal and this one was performance. I did not answer. I turned around and I walked out. I understood, walking back across the square, that this was not a bad morning. This was every morning from now until whatever comes at the end of mornings. This was the shape of my life. I have been here now, by my count, and I am the only one who counts anymore, 182 nights. I want to tell you about the 50th. I had walked down to the post office at midday because I still checked the box, out of a habit that was slower to unlearn than the rest of me. Ruth was sweeping the step. She had a straw broom she used every day at that hour, and I had passed her on it perhaps 30 times before the missed word, and she had always said good afternoon, and I had always said good afternoon, and that had been the whole of our acquaintance. On the 50th day I came up the walk and she was sweeping, and I stepped around her and she looked up. Her face did something I had not seen it do before. It puzzled. Her eyebrows drew together for perhaps a second and a half, and her mouth opened as though she were about to say a name, and her eyes searched my face the way you search a face for a memory you can feel in your chest but cannot find in your head. She held that expression for the length of a slow breath. Then it smoothed. Her eyebrows lifted, her mouth closed, her eyes went polite and blank. She nodded to me the way she nodded to strangers, which is to say kindly, briefly, without weight, and she went back to her sweeping. I stood on the step of the post office for a long time after that. I understood something I had not understood before. The count was not passive. The count was doing something. It had to work to keep me invisible, and then Ruth's face had briefly caught me the way a sleeve catches on a nail, and something inside the count had reached up and unhooked me. It was not effortless. It was maintenance, and a thing that requires maintenance can, in principle, fail. I did not tell Elias. I did not know how. But I have thought about Ruth's face many times since, and I hold it the way I hold Elias's hand at the bottom of the switchback. A small, warm thing in a cold room. I want to tell you now about the 93rd. I had been walking down the switchback in the dark. I did that sometimes in the small hours after the prayer because the cabin got very still when the town below was returning to sleep, and my body still remembered being useful, and walking was the only thing that satisfied the memory. It was maybe 4 in the morning. There was no moon. I came down the last curve of the switchback where the road flattens into the edge of the square, and Elias was standing there. He was not walking. He was not going anywhere. He was just standing at the bottom of the switchback in his canvas coat, hands in his pockets, looking up at the road as though he had been waiting for the road to bring him something. And I understood, without either of us saying anything, that he had been waiting for me. I stopped a few feet away from him. He did not step forward. He did not smile. He looked at me, directly at me, in the way he had not been able to look at me since the morning after the missed word, and he raised his right hand once out of his pocket, up to about the height of his shoulder. He held it there for perhaps 2 seconds. Then he lowered it. The hand trembled, not from fear, from the small, honest tremor of a man in his 60s who had arthritis in that hand and had raised it anyway. I had seen him favor it in the square, opening jars with the left, counting change with the left. The right had been the price. He had paid it in the dark at the bottom of a road, and he had held it up for 2 full seconds so that I would see it, and I understood in that moment that remembrance in this town was labor. It was not thought. It was not sentiment. It was a hand that hurt, held up in the cold at 4 a.m, for a man the town could not see. As he raised his hand, the inside flap of his coat opened a fraction. There was a folded piece of paper pinned to the lining above his heart. It had been folded and unfolded many times. The crease was soft, the corners were rounded, and I could see through the folds a column of handwriting. Names, one under the other, in a slow, careful hand I recognized from a note in my kitchen drawer. Aldous's hand. Elias had been keeping a list of the unremembered since before I arrived, and he had added to it in his own handwriting underneath Aldous's, and I could see the newest name near the bottom of the fold before he lowered his arm and the coat closed again. He turned and walked across the square and up his side street and was gone. I stood at the bottom of the switchback for a long time. I understood standing there that he had chosen me the way he had chosen Aldous. He had decided in some private hour to say my name to himself every day, the way he had said Aldous Burns every day since Aldous stopped being counted. He had come to the bottom of the road at 4 a.m. to let me know, in the only way the count would permit, that I was on the paper above his heart. That is the only acknowledgement I have received in 182 nights. I hold it carefully. There was a morning, somewhere between the 93rd and the 100th, when I walked past the low wall by the tower and found a small wooden thing on the ground in front of it. It was a token, half finished. The boy Samuel had been shaping it the day before. It was pale wood, cut to about the size of my thumb, and on its face he had carved 3 letters, C-O-R, just the first 3 letters of a name. He had not gotten to the rest. He had put it aside or dropped it or left it there to come back to. I stood over it for a long time. Then I bent down, without touching it with my fingers, and I nudged it back to the exact place I had found it, using the edge of my boot. I straightened. I did not touch it again. It was gone the next morning. I do not know if he finished it. I try, most days, not to know. I have learned other things. The tower does not always speak in the same voice. Some nights the third strike carries names I have never heard from towns I have never been to, and I do not know if there are other ledgers or if the keeper carries many books, and I write those names down in a notebook I keep on the kitchen table. I have 37 so far. I say them aloud in the mornings, one by one. It costs me nothing. I do not know what it might be worth to whoever those names belong to. I have heard on certain third strikes, not many, 5 perhaps out of the 182, a second breath beneath the bell, further down than the exhalation on the tape, older, held longer, not quite in time with the first. I do not know what it is. Aldous knew. I do not. I say my own name too at the end. Corwin Ashe. I make myself the 38th. I do it because I saw once, on the window of the cabin in the hour after the prayer, a slow patch of condensation drying in the shape of letters, and the letters were the beginning of a word I did not finish reading, and I have decided since that morning that whatever the Count is doing to me, it will not do without my speaking against it. I have gone up to the tower twice more, in daylight, from a distance. I did not stand under it. I only wanted to look. Both times I noticed the same thing I had noticed the first time, and one thing more. The stones were not the local stone. Their shadow did not fall in the direction the sun required, and when I got close enough to the base to rest my hand near them, without touching, I did not touch. I could feel that they were the same temperature as my hand, not colder. not warmer. In November and December, in the deep, cold hours of January, when everything else in the square had a killing chill on it, the stones of the tower held the temperature of a living person, as though the wall of the belfry were the skin of something that had been maintaining its own heat all along. I do not sleep the way I used to. I lie down. The dark passes. I get up. My hands are steady. There is a stillness in me now I did not arrive with. I think a person is made partly of being counted, and I think when the count lets you go, there is a certain quiet where that part of you used to be, and I think, God help me, that this quiet is what the listing had meant by the word quiet, the word Patrice used. Tonight at 2:47, the porch lights below me will bloom. Tonight at 3, the bell will ring. The town will speak the prayer, and I will speak it with them from a room they cannot see, and the count will pass over me the way wind passes over a stone. If you are listening to this and you are thinking of coming up the mountain, don't. If you are already up the mountain, learn the words. Do not let a neighbor knock at 2:30. Do not let anything ever put you off your center before 3. Kneel at 2:49. Breathe. Be inside the prayer before the first strike. If you miss, you will not die. Something worse, you will continue. You will make coffee. You will walk down into the town, and the town will not know you. I have one last thing to tell you. 2 nights ago, the card changed again. I had not looked at it in a week. I had no need to. The prayer lives in me now the way a heartbeat lives in a chest. But I picked it up because a piece of ash had settled on it from the stove and I wanted to wipe it clean, and when I turned it over, I saw that beneath the 5th sentence in the same plain serif type, a 6th sentence had appeared. I want you to see it the way I saw it. I want you to have the white space around it that I had. I set the card down on the table. I read what it said. You are still speaking. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I lit a match from the box beside the stove and I held the flame to the corner of the card. The lamination softened. The corner curled and went brown. The card began to shrink toward the center in the way plastic shrinks, but the type on it did not burn. The letters, every letter of the prayer, every letter of the 6 sentences on the back held their black shape as the material around them melted, until I was holding a curled brown shell in my fingers with the print still legible on it, floating in the ruined plastic like ink in water. I blew out the match. I set the card down on the counter beside the tape recorder, in the exact position a new buyer would find it first when he came into the kitchen. I set the note from Aldous beneath it, the way it had been when I found it. I straightened them both. I made the arrangement neat. I did this because someone will come. I do not know when. I do not know his name. I know the second drawer will be closed when he arrives, and I know he will open it. And I know he will read the card first because that is what I did, and I want him to read the note under it before he learns the words. It is 2:46. The pines on the ridge are moving. The town is beginning to wake beneath me in its careful, coordinated way. In 1 minute, the porch lights will come on. In 14 minutes, the bell will ring. I have said the names this morning. I have said Aldous Byrne, who raised chickens and liked lemon in his coffee. I have said the 37 from the 3rd strikes. I have said Corwin Ashe. I turn off the light. I kneel by the window. I place my hands flat on my thighs and I center my breath, and I feel the cold of the floor come up through my knees. In the dark glass of the window, my reflection settles into place a fraction of a second after I do. I see myself finish arriving, and then it is still, and it is mine. And it waits. The porch lights below me begin to bloom. I will kneel. I will speak the words. I will not miss. Not tonight.